This is a true story of Oscar, quote, Curley, unquote, McClure, born in St. Louis, Missouri, 11/25/1925, age 45. Educational background, a college graduate. Speaks 5 languages fluently. Employment record, ex-entertainer, ex-salesman, an ex-social worker, an ex-teacher. His criminal background, a drug addict. In 1946, arrested for illegal sale of liquor in a St. Louis speakeasy. In 1952, Indiana State Farm, theft, spent 60 days. 1957, 5 years in a federal prison, sale and possession of narcotics. 1964, 2 years, Indiana State Penitentiary for forgery. Presently, unemployed, undergoing drug rehabilitation. Presently, concerned with fighting drug addiction in this country. You know, Curley, when we was driving, early in the office, you mentioned the fact that, what's this about I wish I had a Cadillac for all that shot?
Well, I was looking at my arm, and as I see these tracks, tracks, that's the terminology they use for these scars on my arms, and I guess the result of, I guess that's what they're from, the result of sticking a needle in them over a long period of time. I just wonder sometimes, looking at those tracks, how much money actually was shot up, how much dope was shot up. If I had the money that I put in my arm, man, I imagine I could buy a whole fleet of Cadillacs.
Now you say you've been shooting now. You say you started shooting when you was about 16.
Well, I wasn't shooting at 16, no. I started smoking pot, drinking wine. In high school, that was the hip thing to do. But I didn't start shooting, actually injecting myself with narcotics until some years later. But I was in that environment. I saw a lot of young cats that did start using drugs around 16, 17. Many of whom exchanged the schoolroom for the pool room. And I guess that started it all.
How long would you say you've been shooting? Were you actually shooting?
Well, since about 1948.
From 1940.
About 23 years.
About 23 years.
Right.
What would you say the average dollar day habit that you had, and about how much did it cost?
Roughly around $100, $150 a day. Yes, it is. But
look, okay, so at about $150 a day, let's say that you were shooting. How much would you have to steal to get well, just let's say how much would merchandise, what was your basic thing
well,
for getting?
Stealing was one,
yeah.
And then again, I could talk pretty good, so I'd do little con games and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the major portion of it was gained through stealing.
Or you
boosting, going downtown to various stores and various shopping centers and hiding merchandise under my clothing and walking out of the store with it and taking it to a so-called fence. But they don't give you the full value of the merchandise, what it's worth, that is. You get maybe a third or even less than a third of what the actual merchandise is worth. So in terms of how much I would have to steal in order to get, say, a $150 habit taken care of, 3 times that much, around $450, $500 worth of merchandise
$500 a day you steal.
Mm-hmm.
So you get that back like $150. Would you take it all, or you steal part of the day and then get a fix, or then what would?
No, usually you go out in the mornings, or whatever time is right during the day that the sales force is reduced, maybe around noontime even. And you just work continuously until you get the amount of merchandise you think you need to sustain your habit. Now what happens is when you come in the evening, after you've finished, it's just like a job, after you've finished work, you take your stuff to the fence and he gives you your money. And then you buy enough drugs to last you that day, and hopefully enough for the following morning, so that you'll have that morning fixed before you go to work the next day.
All right. So you got a downtown gig, really?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
What about, so you say $150 a day, that's almost $1,000 a week. In fact, that's over $1,000 a week.
Right.
So $1,000 a week, right? That's what was necessary to supply you.
Roughly.
Time 52 weeks. That's $52,000 a year over, you say you shot for 20 years?
Around 23 years.
23 years. That's $1 million worth of stuff.
That's right. So you see, I could have had a fleet of Cadillacs or anything else I wanted materially. You know, that's what's really one of the drags, looking at it strictly from the economic sense. Of course, I wouldn't even try to attempt to emphasize the economic aspect of it, because there are other far more important aspects of drug addiction. But that certainly isn't important, that economic thing.
Mm-hmm.
Man,
you mentioned the fact that when we were coming down in the car, that you mentioned about, you were talking about something about pushers and shooting up in what the pushers. What were the pushers? Were they usually addicts or what?
You know, I've never known over 2 or 3 pushers in my life who weren't addicts.
Who weren't addicts?
Who were not addicts.
Okay.
Because at this level, and when I say this level, I mean the street level.
Okay.
Mostly all pushers are pushers-addicts.
What do you mean by that?
You never get to see the big guys, the guys who really make the big buck. And when I say the big buck, I mean $100,000 a year. Better men, you know.
Okay.
Mostly all the addicts, pushers I know, are guys who have 150 nickel bags, and that's a small little one-shot size of a package of heroin or cocaine, whatever the case may be, whatever the drug may be. He's got just so many of those to sell, and he gets a portion of the sale. For example, if the stuff costs $5 on the retail market to the consumer, the street addict, then the pusher gets, say, $3. Or rather, no, the man who supplies him gets 3, and he, the pusher, gets 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then he may get a few bags for his own use, for his own consumption.
Mm-hmm.
So he does it to keep his habit going. Now, I'm not saying this to minimize his involvement or to glorify his activity, but I think the record needs to be set straight, because so many people think that every time they hear the term pusher, that there's some sleazy individual who slides up to some school kid, and on the school ground and says, "Hey, Junior, and you want some heroin?" It's not that at all. All the guys I've known, and this has been over several states in the union, who sold drugs, sold to fellow addicts like themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I know of no concentrated activity among black addicts to get to school kids to induce them to use
drugs.
Let
me ask you this: Have you ever had to push any yourself?
Well, I push some. Sure, I pushed some in order to maintain my habit.
You did.
I didn't do it consistently. And the only time well, no, that wasn't true either. I was about to say the only time I tried I got busted, but that wasn't true. I got busted for going out into the streets, getting some drugs, merely 7 $5 bags, for a so-called friend of mine who was in the company with a treasury agent. Mm-hmm. I got 5 years as a result. But as far as pushing consistently and living high off the hog and buying Cadillacs and split levels and all these goodies that people are supposed to make selling drugs, that never happened to me. I shot all mine up.
Curley, you got a lot of marks and scratches and lines on your arm,
Mm-hmm.
And is it basically just on your arm, or you got them other places?
No, just basically on my arms. I was, I guess, more fortunate than some. A lot of addicts have had to go in their legs, some in their jugular vein, in the throat, neck, that is, and some in their. I know one case, one guy who went in his forehead, in that large vein that runs right down the middle of his forehead, and incidentally he caught some kind of disease. It broke out into an abscess, and he's got a great big nasty mark there for the rest of his life. He'll probably carry to his grave as a result of that injection.
You were telling me about a guy who was really uptight, went to Cleveland, who was shooting some dope. Evidently he was an addict, and what's this about? He took somebody's bag?
Yeah, it's a young guy who's right here from this town, who was very well liked by many of his contemporaries. Rather bright young lad who went astray and got into the drug crowd, got into using dope, and he went to a small town in Ohio. I don't think it was Cleveland, another small town, Columbus, Toledo, Lima, somewhere. At any rate, he started selling drugs for some people there, and they gave him a certain amount of drugs to sell. And instead of him selling the drugs, he used them himself. So after having used them, he had to get in the wind, so to speak. He had to take it on the lam. He had to run, because they would seek retribution. They'd do something to him, hurt him in some kind of way. So he came here, and he stayed about 3 weeks, and he went back. And I guess they were pretty incensed at him, to say the least. They slipped him a $5 bag of drugs, which was not really drugs, but rat poison. And he injected this rat poison in his veins. And if you've ever seen a rat who's taken rat poison, you know that this rat's carcass swells up in death and bloats. And that's what happened to him after he took injected that rat poison into his veins. It just went all through his system, and it killed him. And he swelled up grotesquely, and his skin turned almost black. It was a horrible thing to see. A young man.
Curley, let me ask you this. What about, I've heard that once a junkie, always a junkie. What's to that? You shot over $1 million worth of dope in your arms, and is that true, or can you ever really clear your system up, or what happens?
Well, first of all, drugs is it's both mental and physical. And even though one may clear himself up physically, I think mentally, drugs are always a part of a guy's psyche. I don't think you ever really get rid of a habit. I think you can become an inactive addict. I think there are two stages: active addiction and inactive addiction. And at any time, the inactive addict may get back on active status.
Now, when you told me that you were involved with a lot of entertainers who had big names, not necessarily to say that they used the drugs, but at one time you told me that you had a good career ahead of you.
Right.
What was happening there?
Well, I was going around the country with various bands and combos, some of whom were name groups. I won't go into naming any of them, but top flight musicians, and many of them got high off pot, smoking pot, and some of whom, as we well know, I'm not letting anything out of the cat, letting the cat out of the bag. A lot of people already know that many musicians and entertainers ultimately gravitate toward narcotics, and this is what I believe kept me from succeeding materially as an artist in show business. The fact that I got hung up on drugs, and every time I'd be on my way to the top musically, that drug activity, that addiction.
What do you mean you're on your way on the top musically?
Well,
for example, what are you talking about?
Well, when you're talking about on your way on the top, you're talking about making a salary, say, of $500 a week or better.
Okay.
Then you're no longer a C musician or a C entertainer. You have 3 grades, A, B, and C. You go from C to B and B to A, of course.
All right.
And then the class C musician, the lowest one on the rung economically, makes anywhere from $100 to $500 a week. Class B musician makes anywhere from $5 to $1,000 a week. Mm-hmm. Class A musician makes from $1,000 to $100,000 a week.
All right.
So I was on my way up the ladder. I had gotten up to over $500 a week. You know.
Well, how did the drugs affect? How did the drugs affect?
More money.
You know, I mean, you
drugs.
say, okay, well how did the drugs affect your career?
Oh, right. Well, sometimes it would be time to go on the bandstand. See, the band had to hit at 10 o'clock.
All right.
And I wouldn't have made my connection by 10 o'clock.
What connection?
My drug connection.
All right.
So instead of being on the bandstand at 10 o'clock, like my employer, the cafe or tavern or club owner wanted me to be, with the rest of the group, I was somewhere running around town like a crazy man looking for somebody with some dope. So people won't continue to employ you as a singer or an MC or a musician or whatever you are.
You had money in your pocket.
Oh yeah, I had money.
But you were trying to find a pusher.
I was looking for somebody with some dope. Right. I missed several engagements. For example, I was with a big name band one time, and I had to go from Columbus to New York. We were playing a one-nighter in Columbus, Ohio, and we were going on from Columbus to New York the next day. Well, I missed the darn bus. So instead of going to New York with the band, I ended up coming back home. So I missed out on the whole engagement. You know.
So you
got fired from the band, you know.
You was looking for the pusher.
Yeah, I was looking for the man with the drugs, the miracle man, the man with the happy dust.
Yeah.
So I thought.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, which really misery does.
So let me ask you this: when you go to a town like that, and how do you find a pusher?
Well, you usually go into the sleaziest part of town. At least back then. Let's see. I'm talking in terms of, say, what, 5-10 years ago.
Okay. All right.
You usually go into the ghetto, if you will,
mm-hmm.
and it takes one to know one. You can always recognize someone who's using drugs. There are certain physical symptoms that one can recognize if one uses drugs. Mm-hmm. They have their own little society, and you go into a part of town where you think the drugs are being sold and bartered and used, and you run into an addict, and if he's congenial enough and not overly suspicious, he might turn you on to a connect or even cop for you himself, and
all right.
Your problems are over.
Now, you mentioned the fact about the ghetto. Mm-hmm. You know, we read the papers every day where at one time when we were driving up in the car, you mentioned the fact that in this city you knew all the addicts. What's taking place now?
20 years ago in this city, I knew every addict, I believe both black and white.
How many would you say, probably?
Roughly 25, 30, less than 50.
20 years ago?
20 years ago.
How many would you say we got now?
Countless number. You've got hundreds of youngsters from 16 to 21. Kids I've never even seen before, running around like wild people, looking for and using drugs.
Now, you mentioned before, let's get back to the ghetto thing.
Okay.
You said that when you would usually go into a town, you would always go to the ghetto.
Right.
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 Where do we stand today? As far as that's concerned?
Drugs are still in the ghetto, but they're not the exclusive monopoly of the ghetto as they were years ago. Mm-hmm. Drugs have gone to the suburbs, as you well know. You can find drugs anywhere now. You can find drugs on the college campus now. Your institutions of higher learning, drugs are being bartered, sold, and used. So it's no longer a matter of going into the black ghetto. And when I said ghetto originally, I was speaking about the black ghetto. Mm-hmm. This is where drugs were originally dumped. The people in the ghetto, I suppose, had more of a need to escape than some of their more fortunate brothers who were in better economic straits in other more habitable parts of the community. Mm-hmm. Suburbs, for example. Mm-hmm. So there were no drugs in the suburbs years ago. Mm-hmm. Everything was in the ghetto. And even people who were in the higher echelons of society, if they wanted drugs, You'd see them, they'd come together to buy drugs. But now drugs are being used by housewives in suburbia and their children.
You mentioned the fact that you in Harlem.
Right.
And
Right.
some alarming things were happening there.
I tell you, man, I ain't never seen nothing like this before in all my life. I went up to New York last year with a group of people, friends of mine, and we just decided we'd walk through Harlem. I hadn't been to New York since for quite a number of years, and I just wanted to note some of the changes. Man, the town, the area, Harlem, let's stick to Harlem, was overrun with youthful addicts. And when I say youthful, I can't be too emphatic that these kids that I saw were 7, 8, 9, 10, pre-teens. You know, in New York, there have always been these large tenement dwellings. And almost, it's a ubiquitous thing to see the stoops, the steps in front of the tenements. And kids are just lined up on these steps, 3 and 4 deep, nodding under the euphoric effects of narcotics. It's almost as though an entire section of town had just given completely away to narcosis. It's a saddening, it's a shocking thing to see so many young people, kids. And when I say young people, I don't mean teenagers. I'm not talking about the 20 to 30 group. I'm speaking about kids, man. Young, innocent children who are sticking needles in their arms.